Hi, and in this video, I am going to explain a thriller horror movie. In this terrifyingly suspenseful thriller, a family must navigate their lives in silence to avoid mysterious creatures that hunt by sound. Knowing that even the slightest whisper or footstep can bring death, this movie name is The Quiet Place. Day 89. Most of Earth's human population has been wiped out by sightless extraterrestrial creatures with hypersensitive hearing. Boasting considerable size, speed and a seemingly impenetrable armored shell, they use their auditory acuity to locate and attack anything that makes any noise. The Abbott family, consisting of Lee, Evelyn, Marcus, Bo, and Regan, silently scavenged for supplies while communicating non-verbally through American Sign Language. Bo reaches for a toy shuttle sitting on a shelf. However, it is just beyond his reach. It nearly comes crashing to the ground, but Regan makes a last-moment catch, preventing any noise. Lee arrives and tells Bo to go find his mom. Lee returns with some items that'll hopefully boost the signals on their radio. He and Regan are joined by Evelyn and Marcus. Bo joins them with the toy shuttle in hand. Lee slowly approaches and removes the batteries from the toy, leaving both the shuttle and the batteries on the counter as they exit the store and return home before it gets too dark. However, on their way out, Regan returns the shuttle to Bo without the batteries. Bo manages to retrieve the batteries on his own and insert them into the toy shuttle as they're crossing the bridge. The toy begins to sound, attracting the nearby creatures. However, with Regan being deaf, she cannot hear. Lee places Marcus on the ground and rushes to Bo, but he is too slow, and Bo is killed by a creature. Day 472, Evelyn approaches Regan as she lays in the fields of their farm and walks her back to the house. Lee monitors them and the entire farm through a surveillance system he's installed. He's also made notes of the creature's blindness, armor, and attraction to sound, as well as confirmed at least 3 in their immediate vicinity. Lee then proceeds to turn on the radio and send SOS signals through Morse code, though there is no response. Marcus pretends to drive the broken-down truck sitting in the fields. He looks in the rearview mirror and sees his father approaching. Lee calls him over and sends him back home, where a pregnant Evelyn awaits. Lee then gets on top of one of the silos and looks through a memory box dedicated to Bo. Back in the barn, Evelyn prepares for the arrival of their child, and Marcus and Regan plaster the walls with newspaper to soundproof the room. As the sun goes down, Lee sets a fire on top of the silo to signal the other nearby residences, who in turn do the same. While preparing dinner, Evelyn sends Regan to alert Lee. She is reluctant, but obeys her mother's wishes. That night, Lee, Evelyn, Regan, and Marcus gather around the dinner table, take each other's hands in prayer and eat. After dinner, Regan and Marcus play a game of Monopoly. In all the excitement, Marcus accidentally knocks over the oil lamp and causes a small fire that is quickly extinguished by Lee. However, they are reluctant to breathe a sigh of relief, as the noise seemingly drew the creatures to their home. Something is crawling on the roof. Lee looks out the window. Fortunately, it is only a couple of raccoons. Evelyn joins Lee as he's working on an amplified hearing aid for Regan. She drags him away from his work, and the couple proceed to dance while listening to Harvest Moon by Neil Young. Day 473, the very next day, October 3, 2021, Evelyn takes her blood pressure. She's due to give birth in just under 3 weeks, on the 20th. She then listens to the baby's beating heart. Regan makes her way through the house, stepping on the green paint marks on the floor so as not to cause any creaks. Just as she's about to head in the basement, Lee snatches her away. She questions why she can't go down there. He fears that she will make noise and asks her to please stay out of the basement. He then gives her a hearing aid that he forged from a radio amplifier, but she denies the hearing aid, insisting that it won't work, that they never work. Still, he places the hearing aid in her hand and leaves. Velen homeschools Marcus. Currently, she's teaching him math. However, the lesson is cut short as Lee alerts Marcus that it's time to go hunting. Marcus is fearful that they will encounter monsters, though Evelyn assures him that his father will always protect him. She explains that it's important for him to learn these things so that he can take care of himself as well as them once they get older. Evelyn sees Lee and Marcus off. However, Marcus wishes to stay, whereas Regan volunteers to join her father, but Lee insists that Regan stay behind to help her mother. Lee then kisses Evelyn goodbye and leaves with Marcus. Regan goes into her room and notices the hearing aid her father made sitting on the bed. She turns the device on, but as expected, it does not work. She then begins to pack her book bag with extra clothes, a book, Bo's toy shuttle, and wire cutters. Lee takes Marcus to the river, where he's installed homemade flips into the water. Marcus nearly takes off running in fear that the sound will bring the fish nets to catch food. Lee loses control of the fish and its creatures, but Lee explains that the loud roars of the river contain the smaller sounds. Evelyn climbs up the stairs with a bag of laundry. The sack gets caught on a nail, and she struggles to get loose. While she manages to get the sack free, she unknowingly exposes a sharp nail in the staircase. Lee takes Marcus just beneath the waterfall, where he shouts loudly, free of worry of alerting the nearby creatures, and promises Marcus that he's safe. Afterwards, Marcus asks his father why he didn't allow for Regan to come, and if he blames her for Bo's death. Lee insists that he doesn't, but Marcus informs him that Regan blames herself. Lee explains that it was no one's fault. Marcus asks if his father still loves his sister, which he does. In that case, Marcus advises Lee to tell Regan that he loves her. Regan makes her way back to the bridge where Bo died, where her family has staged a grave and memorial. She then takes the shuttle out her bag, snips the wires that caused the toy to make noise, and places it at his grave. After catching some fish, Lee and Marcus make their way home, where they come across an elderly man standing over what is presumably his wife, who was killed by one of the creatures. Lee pleads with the man to keep quiet. However, the pain is too much to bear, and he lets out a loud scream. Lee picks up Marcus and takes cover behind a tree as a creature arrives and kills the man. Suddenly, after spending the day in Bo's old room, crying and reminiscing, Evelyn's water breaks. She makes her way into the basement, where she steps on the exposed nail and accidentally drops the glass picture frame from Bo's room. It shatters and draws the attention of the nearby creatures. After signaling an emergency by changing the exterior house lights to red as a danger signal, Evelyn notices one of the creatures walking around upstairs. As they arrive home, Lee and Marcus notice the red lights and rush to the farm. Evelyn picks up a timer and hides behind the wall as one of the creatures make their way down into the basement. The timer goes off, and Evelyn rushes upstairs while the creature is distracted, but she is forced to flee upstairs after spotting another creature just outside the house. Lee hands Marcus a flashlight and tells him to launch the rocket in order to lure the creatures away from the house. Evelyn's contractions are getting stronger by the moment. She is forced to lie back in a bathtub and remain calm and quiet while the creatures move throughout the house. Meanwhile, Marcus runs into the field, where he sets off the firecrackers, the explosions providing a loud enough noise for Evelyn to scream without being heard. Armed with a loaded shotgun, Lee makes his way into the house and follows the trail of blood to the bathroom, where he finds Evelyn laying in the shower with their newborn baby boy. Marcus is startled by the sounds of the rustling leaves within the cornfields. He flees in the opposite direction, wandering aimlessly before knocking himself out from running into a tractor. Lee carries Evelyn and the baby back to the barn and heads underground as the child starts to cry. Lee puts an oxygen mask on the baby and places him inside a wooden crate, where his cries are muffled. Regan makes her way home after noticing the fireworks. She sees a light coming from within the fields and stops. Unbeknownst to her, one of the creatures stands just a few feet away. However, her hearing aid produces some kind of high-pitched frequency that scares the creature off, but also inflicts a fair amount of pain on Regan as well. Evelyn awakens from a nightmare with Lee standing at her side. He assures Evelyn that she's safe and that the creatures can't hear them underground. Evelyn then asks about Regan and Marcus, who are still outside somewhere. However, Lee intends to find them. Evelyn looks over to their newborn baby and then says that she could have carried Bo, but he was so heavy. She feels that she should have been carrying him instead of him walking on his own. She then makes Lee promise that he'll protect their kids. Regan follows the light on the ground to Marcus and embraces him. Lee returns to the surface to find Regan and Marcus. Regan and Marcus have made their way on top of a grain silo and set a fire to hopefully catch their father's attention, but they run out of lighter fluid and the fire dies. Still, Marcus is certain that their father will come for them. Evelyn awakens to find the basement flooded from a busted water pipe. She looks over and sees her baby's crate floating. And just a few feet from him stands one of the creatures that have made their way into the basement. Evelyn creeps over to the crib and retrieves her baby boy, while mere inches from the creature. She slowly backs up and hides in a corner. Lee arrives at the tractor, where he finds the kid's bag. Regan wants to leave, as she believes that their father will only come for Marcus, as he still blames her for Beau's death, but Marcus insists they wait for their dad on top of the silo. Marcus attempts to convince her stay, but he then falls through a trap door into the grain-filled silo. One of the doors falls just a couple inches away. Lee watches from on top of the tractor as this unfolds and spots one of the creatures charging towards the silo. Marcus begins to sink into the grains like quicksand, so Regan dives in to give him a hand, and they use the steel door as a resting platform. One of the creatures then jumps down into the silo, but just like before, it flees after hearing the whining feedback from Regan's hearing aid. Evelyn makes her way back to the house with her baby boy. Lee rushes over to the silo and embraces Regan and Marcus. However, the creature is still near. Lee sends the kids to the abandoned truck, while he grabs an axe from the tool shed. The creature slashes at Lee, leaving a large gash across his chest. Marcus then calls out for him, but Regan pushes Marcus back inside the truck. Regan then starts hearing feedback from her hearing aid. It becomes so unbearable that she turns it off. Then, the creature attacks the truck. With what little life remains in him, Lee pulls himself up and screams out loud to distract the creature from his kids, but not before signaling to Regan that he loves her and that he always has. After the creature charges towards Lee and rips him apart, Marcus takes the truck out of park and it rolls down the hill to the house, where they run into the arms of their mother before running into the house. Evelyn leads Regan and Marcus into the basement. She sits Marcus in a corner with the baby as Regan examines her father's notes on the creatures and on his experimentation with several different implants, which bring tears to her eyes. A creature then makes its way into the basement, and Evelyn holds it at gunpoint. The television static sends the creature into a frenzy. Regan then realizes that the high-pitched frequency from her hearing aid is the creature's weakness. She turns her hearing aid on, causing harm both to herself and the creature. However, for the creature, the pain is so excruciating after Regan places the boosted implant on a nearby microphone to magnify the feedback that it collapses. Painfully disoriented, the creature exposes the flesh beneath its armored head and renders itself vulnerable to a shotgun blast from Evelyn. And though they've managed to kill one, the sound of the gunfire draws more creatures in their direction. With newly acquired knowledge of the weakness of the creatures, Regan begins to use the hearing aid on the microphone, and Evelyn loads her gun, prepared to fight back.